heart of the stone fortress, where centuries of power had settled into the very mortar whispered rumors found purchase in fertile soil. The king, Reginald, was fading, a slow, dignified decay that haunted every court whisper and troubled every loyal servant's gaze. For years, the courtiers had paid lavish sums to maintain the illusion of eternal youth. Gilded combs for hair, poultices of rare herbs applied to pale skin, and endless processions designed to distract from the creeping shadow of decline. But whispers cling like damp moss to ancient walls, and even within the impenetrable circle of royal court life, they can find an opening. The young scribe, meticulous and perpetually underpaid, found himself caught in the gravitational pull of these whispers. He was observant, keenly attuned to the subtle shifts in demeanor that marked a man's true state. And now, something deeper had entered his awareness. It was not merely the physical pallor that troubled him. It was the deep, almost unnatural stillness around King Reginald, a veneer that suggested more than simple aging. This observation earned him the cautious attention of Drusilla, the court physician, a woman whose reputation was as poisonous and delicate as the elixirs she synthesized. Drusilla cornered him in an unused antechamber, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur that seemed designed only for his fragile hearing. She spoke not of routine ailments or simple treatments of constitution. Instead, she breathed names into his ear, names whispered from consulting texts and from the secretive fringes of medical knowledge: rejuvenation, defiance of entropy, and forbidden longevity. His skepticism warred with an intense, consuming curiosity. The idea was scandalous, dangerously so, for it suggested that King Reginald's ailment was not simply fate taking its course, but a malady requiring radical, perhaps unthinkable, intervention. The physician pressed him further, guiding his thought toward the idea of remedy that went far beyond poultices and scented oils. She spoke cryptically of substances that supposedly contained the essence of vitality, ingredients so vile or rare they were relegated to dusty corner cabinets, dismissed by mainstream medical practice as nothing more than the ramblings of charlatans or occult scribblers. It was a dangerous rabbit hole to fall into. Yet the whispers had taken root, and the gravity of the king's deteriorating health pulled him toward it. Driven by both intellectual curiosity and a morbid fascination with the lifeblood of power, the scribe finally located what he sought: an obscure, water-stained manuscript tucked away within the royal archives. The script was archaic, penned in a hand that had long since turned to dust. Yet the ink still held a dark defiance. Its fragile pages contained references not to natural cures or balanced tonics, but to something darkly named and mysteriously potent: rejuvenation sludge. The moment his gaze snagged on those few damning words, the careful order of the scribe's world fractured. This was no mere court gossip. This was an archaeological excavation into forbidden lore. The manuscript treated longevity not as a peaceful surrender to nature's cycle, but as a chemical or magical challenge, a sludge, implying a mixture so dense and potent it defied description. It suggested that the secrets to defying time were hidden away in formulations designed less for healing and more for temporary, magnificent artificial prolongation. The implications hit him with the force of a physical blow. These weren't cures. They were desperate attempts at chemical immortality. The book detailed ingredients that made his stomach turn, things harvested from the fringes of polite society. Calcified bone dust mixed with exotic fungal spores, liquids derived from subterranean sources, and mixtures requiring rituals bordering on the sacrilegious. It was a dangerous cocktail of chemistry, magic, and desperation. The discovery left him breathless in the silence of the archives, suspended between undeniable proof and sheer disbelief. The mystery of King Reginald's pallor had suddenly crystallized into a tangible quest. To understand the true, unsettling nature of the rejuvenation sludge, and whether its use meant salvation or merely a delayed, more dramatic form of ruin. The faded parchment spoke of ingredients more exotic, more vile than any natural remedy. It hinted at a volatile cocktail capable of suspending decay itself, yet the descriptions were maddeningly vague, couched in archaic magical terminology that only deepened the mystery rather than solving it. As the scribe absorbed the information, the stench of decay and forbidden knowledge began to permeate his senses, drawing him deeper into the city's forgotten underbelly. Following the faint geographical markers on the map fragment, he found himself near the old quarter, a sprawling maze of rickety wooden stalls and shadowed alleys where sunlight seemed afraid to tread. This was not a place of legitimate trade. This was the mouth of desperation, the heart of the criminal enterprise, and at its center pulsed the Sin Eater's market stall. Here, in the gloom, stood an apothecary whose presence seemed to absorb all light around him. He smelled faintly of iodine and stale charcuterie, a noxious blend that warned of questionable ingredients. The merchant himself was ancient, draped in robes stained with indeterminate liquids, his eyes holding the unsettling gleam of someone who had sold too many miracles and too few genuine cures. This man did not merely sell herbs, he peddled desperate folklore. The stall itself was a grotesque carnival of medical impossibility. Jars contained luminous powders that pulsed faintly under the meager daylight. Dried things, mummified organs, iridescent fungi grown on questionable media, and unrecognizable biological matter were piled haphazardly on rotting wood shelves. The air was heavy with a cloying mixture of fermentation and medicinal sweat. As the scribe watched, transfixed by the sheer audacity of the inventory, an elderly hand moved through the wares. This seller did not offer simple tinctures. He performed small rituals simply by handling them. He lifted a poultice composed of what looked undeniably like crushed animal entrails, mixed with roots and something darkly crystalline. With practiced economy, he mashed these materials in a mortar fashioned from blackened bone, explaining its supposed efficacy against the slow rot of the spirit and the slackening blood that plagued old kings. The performance was chillingly convincing. He spoke of forgotten rites, of deep forest fungi harvested under specific celestial alignments, and of organs sourced only from animals that had lived a natural, uninterrupted life, a claim so ludicrous it bordered on divine absurdity. The scribe struggled with his internal skepticism. Was this genuine knowledge lost to time? Or was it merely the colorful charlatanism peddled by desperation? The merchant countered all intellectual resistance not with facts, but with sheer, suffocating theatricality. He offered samples of viscous slime that smelled faintly of ozone and wet earth, a thick paste painted upon stale bread crusts, touted as vitality bread, forcing the scribe into a state of utter confusion. It became clear that in this market, truth was not determined by scientific rigor, but by perceived potency and dramatic flair. He observed how the merchant sold hope like currency, cheap, potent, and ultimately ephemeral. The entire spectacle served only to deepen the shadow surrounding King Reginald's decline. If these men could concoct such alarming mixtures for minor ailments in back alleys, what horrors were being refined in the heavily guarded wings of the royal palace? Every dubious poultice, every glowing powder, was a disturbing echo pointing towards something far more potent and dangerous than mere aging, suggesting an intervention that might literally challenge the boundary between life and decay itself. The Sin-Eater's market stall proved to be less a source of cure and more a terrifying index of human desperation. The opulent hall, typically a stage for political posturing and gilded whispers, suddenly became a tableau of catastrophic interruption. It was the high court banquet, designed to celebrate power and longevity, but tonight it served merely as a magnificent backdrop for panic. The air, moments before thick with cloying perfumes and expensive wine, curdled into palpable tension. Every eye was fixed on the long obsidian table laden with delicacies, a feast built not just of sustenance, but of status. Then fate intervened, not with a dramatic flourish, but with an accidental spill. A servant, nervous perhaps from overhearing too much court gossip, or simply overwhelmed by the weight of royal scrutiny, stumbled near the sideboard. His hand brushed against a crystalline vial, its contents luminous and alarmingly vivid. The liquid was exotic, appearing less like any natural beverage, and more like trapped starlight, a shimmering, bioluminescent sludge. It spilled across the polished mahogany, casting ephemeral, unnatural glows that seemed to momentarily stain the very history of the room. A gasp rippled through the assembled nobles, a collective intake of breath that swallowed all other sounds. The spill was hardly damaging in an immediate sense, only aesthetic, disturbing the careful geometry of the setting, but its sheer strangeness, its glowing, otherworldly quality, ignited a volatile curiosity among the elite. Amidst the murmuring confusion and the clinking of overturned crystal, King Reginald himself became the focal point. His regal demeanor, usually maintained by sheer force of will, flickered with an imperceptible tremor. He watched the liquid, his eyes betraying a desperate hunger for something more than mere sustenance. The disruption forced the hand of the court magus, Master Ilarion. Ilarion, a man whose reputation rested precariously on a blend of arcane knowledge and ruthless discretion, saw opportunity where others saw only chaos. The spill was an invitation, a sudden need to perform, to intervene dramatically, to save not just the evening's proceedings, but his own standing within the perilous hierarchy of the court. He moved with practiced grace toward the table, seemingly ignoring the spilled potion. His hands, stained faintly purple from dealing with countless alchemical mixtures, hovered over a silver service tray. Whispers followed him, whispers that questioned whether this crisis was purely accidental, or if it were orchestrated by unseen forces. Ilarion turned to the king, his expression shifting instantly into one of profound, urgent concern. He spoke in low tones, referencing the destabilizing nature of the atmosphere, subtly linking the spilled liquid, the unpredictable catalyst, to a need for immediate revitalization. The tension escalated with terrifying speed. Ilarion began preparing an emergency tonic, a concoction that looked suspiciously like refined mud mixed with phosphorescent reagents. This was no polite refreshment. It was a volatile, chemically charged draft meant to perform a miracle on the spot. The gravity of the situation demanded compliance. The king, displaying a sudden and unnerving eagerness, a desire to conquer the ticking clock of mortality, made no protest. He leaned forward, acceptance shining in his weary eyes. Skepticism remained etched deep within the scribe's gaze. Every movement Ilarion made, every clinking spoon against glass, amplified the suspicion that gnawed at him. This revitalization tonic felt far too performative, far too theatrical for a simple court accident. It smelled faintly metallic and profoundly potent, carrying with it the ghost of forgotten reagents. The act of consumption was deeply ritualistic. The chalice filled with the luminous liquid was presented, not as medicine, but as an oath to vitality, an offering against the creeping decay that threatened all royal bloodlines. Ilarion watched the king's every swallow, his gaze proprietary and intensely controlling. He managed the narrative, guiding the attention of all onlookers away from the substance itself and toward the perceived magic of the cure. The banquet hall held its breath as King Reginald drank the liquid designed to defy time. In the wake of this dramatic consumption, a volatile atmosphere settled over the room. The immediate danger passed, replaced by a strained silence that hinted at deep deception. Yet, for the scribe, nothing had been resolved. It had merely been escalated. He understood, with sickening clarity, that the tonic was not merely temporary stasis. It was an injection of raw, forbidden power directly into the royal bloodstream. The king now contained within him the potential chaos of misused alchemy. The incident served as a dreadful crescendo, raising every suspicion held by the scholar tenfold. It confirmed that the court did not believe in nature's course. They believed only in manufactured longevity. They were addicted to the promise of defying death, no matter how horrifying the price, or how utterly dubious the source material might be. As the remaining guests slowly resumed their conversations, the whispers picking up the pace, laced with awe and fear, the scribe's mission crystallized into dangerous action. He had seen enough of the immediate threat, the desperate theatricality of the cure, that simply recording it was no longer sufficient. The knowledge now burning in his mind demanded physical proof, something tangible that could shatter Alarian's constructed reality of benign necessity. His focus shifted from merely documenting the crime to locating the instruments of the crime. He knew where the true heart of the conspiracy lay, not on this polished table, nor in these shimmering potions, but locked away within the protected, secretive wings of the castle, the domain reserved for forbidden experiments and forgotten histories. Whispers had followed him through the gilded halls, whispers of decline, of pallor that defied mere natural decay. The knowledge he carried, the unsettling truth, gleaned from black market stalls and frantic banquets, had become a dangerous weight. He was no longer simply an observer. He was an investigator standing at the precipice of forbidden secrets. All his inquiries had pointed toward the ultimate repository of such unnatural knowledge. The royal Magus's locked cabinet, the place where true history met raw, volatile magic. The court felt increasingly fragile, a delicately balanced structure held together by desperation and the potent illusion of eternal life. The air itself seemed thick with ozone and old spices, the scent of failed ambition. Every interaction was fraught with unspoken dread. He knew that if he were to prove his suspicions, if he were to connect the suspicious ingredients from the apothecary to the glowing tonic administered at the feast, he would face unimaginable peril. The court Magus, Alarian, represented not just a practitioner of magic, but the desperate heart of the failing royal line itself. He was cornered, his evidence mounting in a mental inventory. The crushed organs, the luminous liquids, the king's increasingly unnatural vitality, purchased at an impossible cost. He approached the restricted wing with caution, moving through shadowed corridors, meant only for the highest echelon of court sorcerers and state secrets. The weight of centuries seemed to press down on him, manifested in the deep silence between the tapestry-hung rooms. The Magus intercepted him near a vast, oak-paneled door, the threshold into the deepest magical quarters. There was no warning glance, only an immediate, palpable wave of controlled fury emanating from Alarion himself. The confrontation was swift and brutal. The Magus's accusation was delivered with practiced authority. Leave this place. Keep your morbid curiosity to yourself. Such matters are not for scribblers, mere chroniclers of history who mistake speculation for fact. But the scribe was past speculation. His skepticism had calcified into an unbreakable conviction. He met Alarion's gaze, steadying himself against the sheer force of the Magus's magical presence. He pressed forward, stating plainly that his investigation demanded access to the source material, the components themselves. The argument escalated quickly from academic disagreement to a desperate struggle for truth within the walls of power. The Magus responded not with reasoned magic, but with physical force, attempting to usher him away, to physically dismiss him and restore the brittle order of the court. Yet, in that moment of pure desperation, when cornered by the very authority he sought to expose, a chance opened. The scuffle was brief, chaotic, and allowed him the fraction of time necessary. He slipped past Alarion's immediate magical grasp, darting into the heavily guarded antechamber adjacent to the Magus's private wing. His mind worked with startling clarity amidst the adrenaline-fueled rush. He found it immediately. A cabinet designed not merely for storage, but seemingly for containment. It was locked, heavy, made of obsidian and wrought iron that spoke of forbidden metallurgy. Unlike the decorative locks in the main palace, this mechanism felt utilitarian, built to keep something dangerous asterisk in asterisk, rather than simply secure. The tension in the confined space was excruciating. A taut wire waiting to snap. He spent precious moments examining the locking mechanism, running his hands over runes that seemed designed not for passage, but for warding off. It was clear this cabinet held secrets of profound, perhaps terrible, consequence. After some agonizing struggle, and utilizing an obscure knowledge gained from dusty academic texts about ancient binding magic, the lock finally yielded with a dry, scraping sigh. The moment the doors creaked open, the stench hit him. Not the pleasant aroma of exotic incense used to mask dread, but something visceral, biological, and profoundly unsettling. Inside, the cabinet was lined with shelves upon shelves, illuminated by little more than shafts of dim light filtering from high windows. These were not scrolls or enchanted artifacts, they were jars. Countless sealed glass vessels, each stoppered with beeswax etched with intricate seals, but it was what he saw through the curved glass that stole his breath. Preserved, unidentified biological matter. Some contents shimmered with a sickly green luminescence. Others were dark, viscous substances that looked disturbingly like tar mixed with coagulated blood. There were samples of things that had no right to exist in a cabinet meant for courtly magic. The jars represented the chemical inventory of defiance, the tangible evidence of what the royal family believed could grant them eternal life. These were not herbs gathered from gentle folklore. They were carefully preserved, unnerving specimens derived perhaps from themselves, or from creatures far outside the known magical lexicon. They were the raw components, the actual foundational ingredients of the so-called rejuvenation sludge. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Every theory, every whispered rumor, every grotesque ingredient observed: the fungi, the crushed organs, the luminous liquids, they all culminated right here. This cabinet was not a storehouse of elixirs. It was a biological and magical chemistry set for defying death. The Magus, Ilarion, who had been hovering in the entryway, suddenly went utterly still. The controlled fury evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked panic that transformed him from an impenetrable guardian into a cornered animal. His face drained of color as his eyes locked onto the contents of the cabinet, and then finally settled on the scribe's appalled gaze. The accusation was not verbal. It was purely magical, an immediate surge of energy aimed at silencing him forever. But the weight of the evidence, the undeniable physical proof arrayed before them, left him momentarily paralyzed. He saw his desperate facade crumble, revealing the deep, corrosive terror of a life built upon a fundamental falsehood. The secret he had so rigorously guarded was staring back at him from within the glass jars. Days passed in the uneasy silence that settles over a palace consumed by dread. The illusion of vitality, so meticulously crafted and so desperately maintained, was beginning to fray at the edges. King Reginald had not died, as many had feared, but he had endured something far worse: transformation. He appeared superficially preserved, radiating an unsettling, almost feverish energy. Yet beneath that unnervingly vibrant veneer, there was a deep instability. Eyes were too bright, his movements too sharp, possessing the desperate alertness of a cornered animal. The unnatural maintenance, the constant infusion of forbidden reagents, had not cured him. It had fundamentally destabilized him. It had accelerated decay while simultaneously mimicking vigor, leaving him in a state of perpetual, agitated crisis. The court physician, once the primary architect of the longevity charade, was forced to confront this terrible truth. He realized with chilling clarity that his remedies were not acts of healing, but cycles of controlled deterioration. The sludge and its accompanying potions had never been designed for sustainable life. They merely postponed the inevitable, leaving behind a volatile residue of corrupted biology and unstable magic. The court itself, was fracturing under this unsustainable tension. Whispers, once confined to the edges of the great halls, now rippled through every servant, every noble, and every chambermaid. The nobles, already steeped in an atmosphere of paranoia concerning succession, saw the king's altered state not as a medical disaster, but as a vulnerability, a weakness that could be exploited. Their fear curdled into greed. If Reginald was unstable, then the lines of power were negotiable. The instability served as a catalyst for accusation. The careful tapestry of court politics unraveled in a sudden, shocking burst of suspicion. Suddenly, the life-saving secrets kept locked away with such fervor became weapons against the holders themselves. Among the high-born attendees, the murmuring grew louder, hardening into accusations. They did not accuse him of illness. They accused him of malfeasance, of corruption, and ultimately of poison. The focus shifted entirely from maintaining life to removing perceived threats. The physician, trapped between his desire to save a royal lineage and his horrified realization of the chemical decay underway, found himself caught in the crossfire. He was privy to too much, the precise nature of the sludge, its ingredients, and its deadly side effects. His expertise suddenly rendered him suspect. The nobles needed scapegoats, people whose silence or knowledge could be purchased or silenced. The physician's complicity in this desperate enterprise became his undoing. The whispers alleging slow poisonings, subtle acts of sabotage meant to weaken the king from within, began circulating with terrifying speed. These were accusations that held no physical proof, but possessed immense political weight. The grand hall, once a place of ritual affirmation and feasting excess, transformed into an arena of suspicion. Dinner parties became interrogation sessions. Every gesture was analyzed, every word questioned. The court had built its entire foundation upon the lie that they could cheat death with manufactured chemistry. And when that lie proved unsustainable, the architecture of trust crumbled entirely. The accusations deepened and broadened. It wasn't simply one noble pointing fingers. It was a systemic rejection of the charlatanry itself. They needed an end to the mystery, an explanation that fit their immediate needs, namely, a clear transfer of power that did not implicate anyone in the terrifying black arts or the use of truly poisonous substances. The Magus and the scribe, both keepers of dangerous secrets, became prime targets for this public purge. Their forbidden knowledge was more threatening than any physical illness. The escalating accusations marked the profound emotional consequence of their attempts at eternal life. Paranoia. The court ceased to function as a unified whole. It devolved into small, fiercely defensive factions, each convinced that the others were orchestrating Reginald's slow demise. They viewed the sludge not as medicine, but as an accelerant for conflict, a source of inevitable internal decay. The fallout from the king's unnatural vibrancy had not brought life, but a volatile cocktail of paranoia into the heart of the castle. The rejuvenation sludge had failed its intended purpose, leaving Reginald suspended in an unsettling state, hypervigilant, erratic, and deeply physically altered. This supposed miracle cure was, in truth, a slow poison that destabilized the body's natural rhythm. Within the rarefied air of courtly intrigue, this biological failure quickly translated into a political crisis. The whispers began as murmurs of suspicion, accusations whispered over poorly set banquet tables, and dismissed by arrogant dismissals. But these rumors soon coalesced into something palpable, deep-seated jealousy among the nobles. The king's struggle to maintain an artificial vigor became a source of weakness, not fascination. If his longevity was miraculous, it also meant that life itself could be so profoundly defied, making him seem unnatural, suspect even, to those who viewed their own passing with mere aristocratic disdain. The court physician, confronted by the obvious reality of the king's decline, a decline hastened, and corrupted by the forbidden elixirs, found himself in a desperate corner. He realized that the substances administered were not merely medicinal. They were fundamentally disruptive. The sludge was poisoning him from the inside out, unraveling natural biological processes with sickening efficiency. This revelation shattered the fragile peace of the court, instantly exposing the mechanisms of royal power as being built upon precarious and toxic science. As suspicion solidified into outright hostility, the nobles did not focus their fury on identifying a legitimate cure. Their gaze was much darker, directed instead at anyone who possessed knowledge, anyone who could explain how the king's alleged rejuvenation worked, or more terrifyingly, how it failed. The fear of death gave way to a primal fear of exposure, and in that atmosphere of escalating dread, paranoia became the most potent weapon. The Privy Council, those assembled pillars of aristocracy and influence, called an emergency session. This gathering was not convened by a desire for healing, but by mutual self-preservation. The council hall, usually reserved for sober declarations of war or tax levies, quickly transformed into a viper pit of suspicion. Every face seemed to hold a carefully cultivated mask of grief, shock, and cold calculation. It was here that the tragedy unfolded. Instead of uniting in their shared concern for their sovereign, these jealous noblemen seized the catastrophic failure of the sludge as an opportunity. They turned their collective suspicion inward and then outward, targeting anyone who might possess too much truth. The Magus, Alarian, whose knowledge touched upon forbidden arts and experimental biology, suddenly found himself under intense scrutiny. And the scribe, a persistent investigator whose dedication to uncovering secrets had proven inconveniently tenacious, became an immediate, visible threat. The discourse swiftly devolved from medical concern into accusations of treason. The failure of the tonic was reinterpreted not as a biological disaster, but as a deliberate plot, a subtle poisoning engineered by rivals who sought the king's demise through political means rather than genuine illness. Every expert opinion became suspect, every piece of data about the sludge deemed either insufficient or outright malicious. The accusations were public and damning. The Magus was accused not just of dabbling in forbidden chemistry, but of endangerment of reckless disregard for the stability of the crown. The scribe, meanwhile, was painted as a meddlesome peasant intellectual, one who had dared to scrutinize matters beyond his station, whose very presence represented corrosive skepticism. A purge was orchestrated, not merely of individuals, but of knowledge itself. They sought to cleanse the court of all elements, scientific, magical, or journalistic, that might threaten the carefully maintained facade of royal stability. The evidence gathered by the scribe, from the luminous liquid at the banquet to the jars of preserved organic material in the locked cabinet, was suddenly dismissed as misinterpreted conjecture. The truth, stark and unsettling, became too volatile for the collective comfort of the elite. The council's verdict, delivered under a shroud of feigned righteousness, was absolute. Those who questioned the status quo must be silenced. To admit that eternal life required such grotesque, destabilizing concoctions was to undermine the divine right of kingship itself. The sludge represented a secret too profound, a transgression against natural law that could not withstand the glare of open scrutiny by men whose primary loyalty lay with their own privilege and survival. Fear hardened into ruthless pragmatism. The court ceased to function as an administrative body and became instead a mechanism for self-purging. By neutralizing the Magus and banishing the relentless scribe, the council aimed to restore not just order, but the illusion of natural decay, a controlled decline that was manageable, rather than a terrifying, forbidden plateau of artificial life. The rot started not with the decline of the king, but with the shattering of trust within the castle walls. After the council's vicious verdict, the whispers of treason no longer concerned foreign enemies, but the intimate knowledge possessed by those who had simply observed too much. The realization that the life-extending tonics were nothing more than calculated poisoning had turned suspicion into a lethal physical threat. Every corridor, once merely an axis of passing feet and courtly secrets, now felt like a snare, wired with accusation and steel. The young scribe knew that mere intellectual proof would not save him. It would only hasten his capture. The Magus, the physician, even those who had simply served them, were now suspects in the grand drama of royal decay. Survival demanded not a shield of knowledge, but an instrument of absolute chaos. He needed to escape the gilded cage before the armed loyalty of the court turned into the brute enforcement of justice. The castle, built over centuries upon layers of forgotten passages and necessary subterfuge, held no single point of weakness. It was designed to withstand siege, not human desperation. But panic, unlike disciplined military force, respects no stone wall and obeys no architect's blueprint. It merely follows the path of least resistance. The royal guard, armed with purpose, now fueled by political mandate, began their systematic sweep through the central quarters. Their goal was precise: capture those who understood the formula behind King Reginald's false vigor, the arcane components, the toxic mix found within the Magus's cabinet. They moved with a dreadful efficiency that spoke less of duty and more of cleanup. The scribe watched them from a vantage point overlooking the great hall. The weight of all the truth he held, the images of the preserved organs in jars, the chemical stench of the reagent, felt unbearable, threatening to implode his very bones. He had stumbled into a conspiracy that reached the deepest roots of the monarchy itself, a life support system built on biomagical decay. He remembered an old etching he had seen weeks ago, tucked away in a dusty archive. A diagram detailing sublevels, maintenance passages, originally built for transporting volatile goods or disposing of unwanted waste. These tunnels, running beneath the tapestries and beneath the very polished marble floors of the court, represented his only viable escape route. But reaching them meant traversing areas currently monitored by men whose sole concern was upholding the political will of the jealous nobility. The confrontation was inevitable, not with a single foe, but with the entire suffocating apparatus of royal authority. His hands trembled as he located the secret access panel, a loose flagstone disguised beneath a tapestry depicting a forgotten hunt. It opened into a narrow, dust-choked passage that smelled overwhelmingly of stale minerals and deep earth. Slipping down into the subterranean darkness, he left the relative safety of the upper levels behind, trading polished parquet for damp grit. The passages were a labyrinth designed by necessity rather than beauty. They twisted beneath kitchens and treasuries, traversing forgotten veins of the city itself. He moved quickly, propelled by the adrenaline of impending doom, listening to the heavy tramp of boots echoing above him, an ominous rhythm that signaled their closing net. The plan he had formed was not one of mere retreat. It required a devastating distraction. It needed a confluence of chaos and elemental volatility, harnessing the very materials that represented the secret at the core of his investigation. The forbidden sludge components themselves. He resurfaced near a wing dedicated to the Magus's volatile storage reagents. This area, normally kept under triple guard for safety reasons, was now merely a target of containment. The air here was thick with chemical possibility, smelling sharply of ammonia and scorched arcane metals, using his understanding of the castle's hidden vulnerabilities. The pathways that connected adjacent wings, meant to carry experimental magical runoff. He moved into the heart of the problem. He wasn't aiming for a clean getaway. He was aiming for an eruption. A controlled catastrophe. The volatile reagents, the stored remains, and highly reactive liquids that formed the basic building blocks of the rejuvenation sludge were concentrated here. They were potent enough to destabilize the foundations themselves. The scribe worked with chilling precision, not out of malice, but purely as a means of escape, using knowledge as a weapon against authority. He began to compromise the containment seals on several major storage vats. These weren't simple fires. They were magical combustions, reactions waiting for the right chemical catalyst to ignite their deadly potential. The ensuing conflict erupted swiftly. Guards arrived, realizing too late that the threat was not external, but originating from within the very foundations of the court. A desperate scuffle ensued. A blast of superheated vapor ripped through the air, forcing the guards back and momentarily confusing the pursuing officials. More chaos followed as he manipulated a secondary set of highly reactive acids meant for stabilizing these powerful concoctions, causing them to mix in unintended, explosive ways. The castle groaned under the sudden stress of contained chemical instability. The blasts were not grand explosions witnessed by armies, but localized ruptures, sickeningly loud coughs from the stone heart of the palace. A wing of the royal quarter, filled with valuable and dangerously volatile experiments, suffered a catastrophic structural failure. Stone gave way to burning reagents. Wood vaporized in plumes of magical smoke. He utilized the ensuing disarray, fleeing through passages now compromised by steam and fire, leaving behind a wake of utter destruction that served as his shield and his escape notice. The stench of burnt magic, mixed with the sickeningly sweet aroma of ruined biological matter, clung to him like a shroud. He was an apparition, propelled by necessity into the relative safety of the outer courtyards. From there, he disappeared into the pre-dawn fog that had begun to settle over the city. The flames of the burning wing were the proof. They signaled not just his escape, but the failure and inherent toxicity of the king's desperate quest for perpetual life. He left behind only smoke, ruin, and a devastating, undeniable truth written in scorching char. He had bought himself time to gather witnesses outside the poisoned confines of the palace walls, time to ensure that when the sun rose, the story of the sludge would be told not by whispers and suspicion, but by ash and undeniable evidence. Silence followed the roar of the collapsing citadel. The plume of smoke, a morbid pillar against the bruised dawn sky, was both a shroud and a signal. Hours had passed since the frantic escape, hours spent navigating by scent the metallic tang of blood, the acrid bite of burnt reagents, and the damp earth of ancient passages. Exhaustion clung to everything, but beneath it pulsed a fierce urgency. The truth still needed a voice, and the true source of the blight remained unknown. The burning remnants of King Reginald's court provided no answers, only echoes of desperation. The royal archives, where even the history of the kingdom was kept safe, had been reduced to ash, the intricate secrets swallowed by the flames. All that remained was the direction, out. Beyond the scorched battlements lay the wild lands, places untouched by courtly corruption or the insidious reach of black alchemy. It was in these periphery wilds that the scribe finally found it, not a fortified keep, nor a surviving noble retainer, but a forgotten sanctuary, hidden deep within a fold of ancient forest, overlooked by the relentless march of history, and plagued by inconvenient rumors, stood the remnants of a monastic community, a sect dedicated not merely to piety, but to meticulous preservation. They were the keepers of continuity, men and women who maintained records deemed too dangerous or too profound for the fragile hands of reigning monarchs. This was where the deeper knowledge resided. The air within the courtyard of this secluded order felt strangely detached from the chaos outside. Time seemed not merely slowed, but suspended. Here, amidst overgrown cloister walls and stone weathered by centuries of silence, stood a figure unlike any he had encountered before. He was old, ancient, perhaps beyond mere years, with eyes that held the weary depth of deep wells. This was the keeper of the records, the living repository of forbidden knowledge. The scribe approached with a careful gait, every sense hyper-alert. The sheer gravity of the situation pressed down upon him, heavier than the memory of the explosion, and more crushing than any royal decree. He had survived death's machinations to find the origin point of the decay, the true source of the rejuvenation sludge that had poisoned an entire dynasty. The old man waited patiently, his gaze assessing, not with judgment, but with profound anthropological curiosity. The silence stretched tautly between them, the chasm separating the seeker from the ultimate truth. Eventually, the keeper spoke, his voice a low, dry murmur, like sand shifting across marble floors. He did not confirm the allegations outright. Rather, he presented a collection of scrolls and heavily bound codices that spanned centuries, volumes cataloging remedies, poisons, and unnatural prolongations of life. The scribe's fingers traced the delicate lettering on one particular manuscript, recognizing immediately the archaic sigils associated with prolonged vitality. He had found the documentation, but its context was about to shatter his understanding of what it meant to be alive. The initial research revealed that the pursuit of eternal vigor was not a courtly whim or an accidental side effect of rare reagents. It was a meticulously documented obsession, a scientific endeavor steeped in bioalchemy and forgotten biological principles. The sludge, as it had been termed by the vain courts, was merely the most accessible synthesis of far more potent, disturbing components. The keeper slowly opened another volume, its vellum yellowed and fragile, revealing detailed alchemical diagrams alongside crude anatomical sketches. These drawings did not depict noble aspirations. They illustrated biological processes taken to a dangerous extreme. The truth laid bare before him was sickeningly empirical. The elixir was a powerful biomagical toxin. It required an incredibly specific, horrific matrix of organic decay and concentrated magical corruption. The true source material, far from being exotic fungi or harmless minerals, was derived primarily from advanced biological waste, specifically the processed detritus of corrupted life cycles, mixed with unstable alchemical runoff and failed attempts at transmuting pure vitality. It was, in its raw essence, concentrated magico-biological feces. This realization struck him with a visceral force, stripping away any remaining nobility from the quest for immortality. He realized that the ambition to defy death had not led them to rejuvenation, but merely to highly sophisticated poisoning. The desperation of powerful men, the fear of fading glory, had driven them to violate the most basic natural laws, creating a self-feeding cycle of decay and dependence. What they were taking was not life. It was stolen time, drawn from the very foundation of biological integrity. The weight of this knowledge felt unbearable, more corrosive than any venom. He thought of King Reginald, now merely an expensive, unstable husk, a monument to feudal ambition. The sludge had been a gilded cage, ensuring longevity only through systemic poisoning. It was a magnificent lie told in the language of obscure potions and dramatic rituals. The keeper did not flinch from his revelation. He watched the scribe absorb the horror, his expression remaining one of detached, scholarly pity. The source of the poison was not supernatural malice, but human hubris, the arrogant belief that magic could bypass nature itself. It was an alchemical folly documented through centuries of flawed human ingenuity. The scribe understood then that exposing this truth required more than a single manuscript or a dramatic escape. It demanded surviving the fallout, carrying the knowledge into the light, and fighting against the sheer gravitational pull of deep-seated cultural secrecy and fear. The poisoned glory of royal courts was simply too deeply entrenched to fall easily. It would require generations of tireless effort, built on this terrifying understanding of decay, to finally begin the slow work of cleansing. Outside the scorched walls, the scent of soot and ash mingled with the cold, damp air of dawn. The citadel that had housed King Reginald's desperate quest for eternal vigor was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. Weeks of frantic pursuit, weeks of terror, all culminated in this desolate landscape. Here, far from the gilded cages and political machinations of court life, truth did not require an audience or a monarch's whim. The initial whispers of what had transpired within those stone walls began to take shape into undeniable narratives, carried by the fugitive scribe who now stood witness to history's wreckage. The journey led him away from the stench of decaying power and towards the silent sanctuary of the old monastic order. These were keepers of knowledge, isolated from the relentless cycle of courtly drama and ambition. Within their quiet cloisters, hidden histories slept undisturbed, untouched by royal desperation or magisterial corruption. Here, among shelves heavy with vellum and bound in age, the scribe finally found solace and understanding. The records were exhaustive, charting not grand triumphs, but failures, not glorious ages, but slow, agonizing decays. The monastic keeper, a frail scholar whose eyes held the quiet depth of centuries, revealed the horrifying truth about the rejuvenation sludge. It was never the product of genuine arcane science, nor was it even an attempt at controlled biological enhancement. Instead, it was an accidental synthesis, a potent biomagical toxin derived primarily from corrupted organic waste and years of discarded alchemical experiments. The sheer hubris required to believe that such filth could bottle life was staggering. The sludge was a microcosm of the court itself, promising eternal glory while consisting of nothing but decomposition. It proved that their obsession with defying mortality had not led them to immortality, but rather to systemic poisoning, a slow-motion act of human folly driven by the desperation inherent in ruling men who feared the inevitable decline. The scribe absorbed this knowledge like a sponge soaking up poison, understanding that the king's physical state was merely a symptom, an echoing residue of repeated toxic exposure. The court had not been battling aging, it had been metabolizing slow death. His escape from those burning halls hadn't just been a flight from armed guards, but a desperate rejection of this biological deception. As the years passed and the dust settled over the kingdom, the narrative surrounding King Reginald shifted from mythic tragedy to scientific cautionary tale. The initial whispers grew into murmurs in the common markets, then into formalized texts studied by burgeoning scholars across the land. The toxic secret was too vast, too disgusting for a single court to contain indefinitely. It demanded dissemination and explanation. From this vantage point, outside the ruined city, the scribe watched civilization begin its slow process of healing itself from the trauma inflicted by decades of false longevity. He saw the rebuilding efforts, acknowledging that some walls were necessary to survive, but others, like those built upon toxic secrets and profound hubris, must fall into ruin. The fate of King Reginald himself was a study in protracted failure. Though he had not succumbed immediately after the magical chaos, his subsequent existence defied any notion of recovery. He remained superficially revitalized, yes, but that revitalization was a shell, a taut, brittle mockery of life. The man who once commanded legions and held court with absolute authority was now erratic, physically unsettling, marked by the constant poisoning. His former glory had settled into a deep, irreparable instability. The profound realization dawned upon everyone who cared enough to observe him. The treatment hadn't merely slowed decline, it had fundamentally destabilized his very biology. It was an ongoing assault on the integrity of his being. The man was alive only by maintaining a state of toxic equilibrium, a gilded cage of decay. And in that final, devastating image of the king, broken yet stubbornly enduring within the remnants of his failing kingdom, lay the ultimate condemnation. The sludge had not been a path to defying death. It had merely granted a prolonged participation in its mechanisms. It confirmed the most terrifying secret, that some secrets are simply too toxic for civilization to bear. They poison the truth, they infect the body politic, and ultimately they leave nothing but ashes behind. The legacy of decay was etched not just into stone, but into the very corrupted essence of a once great throne, proving that even magic, when divorced from natural law, is merely